Before Ghost Adventures existed, before the Travel Channel, before the Haunted Museum, before any of it, there was a young man in a Michigan apartment who saw something in a hallway that he could not explain and could not walk away from. That moment did not launch a career. It launched an obsession. And the distance between that moment and where Zak Bagans stands today, what he has built, what he has lost, what the years of chasing darkness have done to the person underneath the persona, is a story that 26 seasons of television were never designed to tell. What really happened to Zak Bagans goes deeper than any episode he ever filmed. It goes into the parts of his life that the cameras did not follow, the relationships that did not survive, the health that deteriorated in ways he disclosed only partially, the compulsions that tightened their grip the more he fed them, and the specific question that has followed him since that Michigan hallway, and that despite everything he has built in the decades since, he has never been able to fully answer. Stay until the end. This is the complete story. Zachary Alexander Bagans was born on April 3, 1977, in Washington, D.C. His parents divorced when he was young, and his childhood was divided between Glendale, California, and the Detroit metropolitan area of Michigan. Those two geographies shaped him in ways that are visible if you know where to look. The California years gave him an exposure to entertainment culture, to the specific texture of a place where image and ambition are the ambient atmosphere, where people construct versions of themselves for public consumption as a matter of routine. The Michigan years gave him something different. The industrial decay of the Detroit region in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the abandoned factories and shuttered neighborhoods, the specific quality of a landscape in the process of becoming a ruin, left an imprint on his aesthetic sensibility that no production designer could have manufactured. Zak Bagans grew up around places that had been left behind, buildings that held the residue of everything that had happened in them, and then been emptied of the people who made it happen. That relationship to abandoned space was not something he acquired as a television host. It was something the geography of his childhood built into him before he had a name for what it meant. He was not a particularly social child in the conventional sense. People who knew him before he became a public figure described someone who existed at an angle to the ordinary social world, who was drawn more to the margins of experience than to its center, who was curious about things that most of his peers found uncomfortable to think about. Death, what persists after it, whether the places where significant things happen retain something of what happened in them. These were not casual interests. They were consuming ones. And they consumed him quietly, privately, across the years of an ordinary Midwestern adolescence, until the night in 2002 when they stopped being theoretical. He was 25 years old and living in Trenton, Michigan, working as a wedding DJ, building a life that had nothing on its surface to indicate what was coming. The apartment was ordinary. The hallway was ordinary. And then it was not. The apparition he encountered that night, a female figure that he has described in multiple accounts as fully formed, visible, and entirely outside any framework his existing understanding of the world could accommodate, did not frighten him into retreat. It pulled him forward. He has said, in interviews across the years, that what the encounter produced in him was not fear as a terminal state, but fear as a beginning, a door that opened onto a question he could not close again. Who was she? What was she? What did it mean that she was there? And what else was out there in the dark that he had been living alongside without knowing it? Within months, he had acquired his first camera. Within a year, he had begun researching locations associated with documented paranormal activity. Within 2 years, he was in Goldfield, Nevada, in the abandoned Goldfield Hotel, filming the raw and unscripted documentary footage that would become the foundation of everything that followed. The decision to go to Goldfield was not a career calculation. There was no career to calculate around. It was the decision of a person who needed to know something and had identified the most direct available route to finding out. What that decision cost him in terms of the life he did not build while he was building Ghost Adventures instead is a question his public narrative rarely frames directly, but that the timeline of his personal life answers clearly enough for anyone paying attention. Ghost Adventures premiered on October 17, 2008, and the version of Zak Bagans that the audience met in those early seasons was a person operating at the absolute peak of a specific kind of fearless energy. He was 31 years old. He had nothing to protect because he had not yet built anything worth protecting. He walked into Bobby Mackey's music world and provoked whatever was in there with a directness that the show's producers initially found alarming. He sat alone in the basement of Eastern State Penitentiary after the rest of the crew had left because he was not finished yet. He went to Poveglia Island, a location whose history of plague death and psychiatric institutionalization made it one of the most psychologically extreme environments that European paranormal investigation had to offer. And he did not leave when everything in his body told him to. That fearlessness was not performance. It was the authentic output of a person for whom the question being investigated mattered more than the personal cost of investigating it. What the audience was not watching during those years was what the production schedule was doing to the rest of his life. Ghost Adventures at its peak was not a show that filmed occasionally. It was a production whose location requirements, travel demands, and overnight lockdown format created a professional life that was structurally incompatible with the ordinary rhythms of personal relationship and domestic stability. Zak Bagans has never married. The relationships that developed and ended across the years of the show's production have been addressed in his public presence only obliquely, in the way that a person addresses things they have processed but not fully resolved. The specific texture of building a professional identity so completely around an obsession that the obsession and the identity become indistinguishable, so that the question of who you are when the cameras are not rolling becomes genuinely difficult to answer, is something the episode count of Ghost Adventures documents without ever naming directly. He gave the show everything, and the show took it. By the middle seasons of Ghost Adventures, people who worked closely with Zak Bagans were noticing something that the show's cameras were not positioned to document: the physical toll of years of overnight location shooting, of sustained sleep disruption, of repeated exposure to environments whose air quality and structural conditions created genuine occupational health considerations, was becoming visible in ways that production makeup and editing could partially but not entirely address. He has spoken publicly about health issues across the years, always in terms that acknowledged their existence without fully mapping their scope. Chronic fatigue, whose specific character differed from ordinary tiredness in ways that people who have experienced it describe as qualitatively different from anything that rest alone resolves. Physical symptoms whose connection to specific locations he has discussed in the framework of paranormal attachment, a framework that his medical advisors presumably engaged with differently than his paranormal research community did. The gap between those two frameworks, between the investigator's explanation and the physician's explanation, is one that Zak Bagans has lived inside for long enough that the distinction may have become less important to him than the fact of the symptoms themselves. The Demon House investigation represents the most publicly documented instance of what extended paranormal exposure produced in him physically and psychologically. The Gary, Indiana property he purchased in 2014 after a family reported experiencing what they described as a demonic infestation severe enough to warrant state child protective services. Involvement was not a location Bagans investigated briefly. He lived there. He filmed there across an extended period. And what happened to him during that time, the physical deterioration, the behavioral changes that people on the production documented, and that he subsequently addressed in the film he made about the experience, was significant enough that he had the building demolished after filming was complete. Not sold, demolished. A person who demolishes a property rather than sell it or walk away from it is communicating something about what happened there that the language of a standard episode of Ghost Adventures was not equipped to carry. The story of what happened at the Demon House in Gary, Indiana, is the most important chapter in understanding what Ghost Adventures ultimately did to Zak Bagans, because it is the chapter where the framework of television investigation gave way entirely to something that operated by different rules. The Ammons family, LaToya Ammons, her mother Rosa Campbell, and her 3 children had reported experiences in the property on Carolina Street that included children walking backward up walls, family members speaking in voices that were not their own, and a series of events documented by social workers and medical professionals that the official state record treated with a seriousness that official records in this area almost never produce. When that story reached Bagans, he did not pitch it to a network and wait for a production green light. He purchased the house with his own money before a single camera arrangement was in place. That decision tells you more about where he was psychologically at that point in his career than any interview he has given about it. What the filming period at the Demon House produced in him has been described differently by different people who were present. The documentary he released in 2019 shows a version of those events. What people who were on the production have said about what the documentary does not show suggests that version is partial. What is documented in the film itself is a progressive deterioration across the filming period, in his physical presentation, in his behavioral patterns, in the specific quality of his engagement with the property and with the people around him. That is visible enough on screen that viewers who watch it carefully have consistently described it as one of the more genuinely disturbing documents the paranormal genre has produced, not because of what the house contained, because of what it appeared to do to the person investigating it. He had the building torn down in 2016. He kept the staircase. It is in the museum now, and whatever he believes came with it is something he has chosen to keep in his proximity rather than put at a distance. That choice is the chapter of the Demon House story that the demolition did not resolve. The Zak Bagans Haunted Museum opened in Las Vegas in October of 2017, occupying a 1920s mansion on Charleston Boulevard that had its own documented history before Bagans acquired it. The collection he installed inside it was not assembled for the museum. It was assembled across years of personal acquisition that preceded the museum's existence, and that the museum ultimately provided a permanent home for. The Dybbuk box, whose history of reputed demonic attachment Bagans had documented in a previous investigation. Charles Manson's television set, Jack Kevorkian's van, Ed Gein's cauldron, Michael Jackson's mirror, acquired from Neverland Ranch, the possessed staircase from the Demon House in Gary. Objects whose connection to violence, death, mental illness, and documented suffering was not incidental to their acquisition, but central to it. What the museum communicates about Zak Bagans that no interview has said directly is that the accumulation is not curatorial. A curator acquires objects for their historical or cultural significance and maintains a professional relationship to them. What Bagans has built is something closer to a private cosmology, a physical manifestation of a belief system organized around the idea that suffering leaves traces in objects, and that those traces are real and meaningful and worth being near. He lives with this collection. He works in its proximity. He continues to add to it. After everything that 26 seasons of Ghost Adventures produced in him, the health consequences, the personal costs, the specific deterioration that the Demon House filming documented, the response was not withdrawal from the things he believes carry darkness. It was deeper immersion. The museum is the most honest self-portrait Zak Bagans has ever produced, and what it portrays is a person for whom the question that opened in that Michigan hallway in 2002 has not closed. It has expanded. It has become the organizing principle of everything. And the cost of that expansion is visible in the collection itself, in the objects chosen, in the building maintained, in the person who cannot stop adding to it. The version of Zak Bagans that the public has access to is a carefully maintained construction, not dishonest. The fear on camera is real, the obsession is real, the genuine investigative commitment is real, but selective in the way that all public personas are selective. The things that do not appear in that construction are the things that the people closest to him across the years of Ghost Adventures have been most careful about in what they say publicly. The specific texture of his private life during the production years, the relationships that the show's demands made impossible to sustain, the degree to which the line between the investigator and the investigation had, by the later seasons, become difficult to locate from either side, the health issues whose full dimension his public statements have consistently understated, and the specific quality of his engagement with the material he works with, the haunted objects, the cursed locations, the documented suffering he has spent his adult life putting himself in proximity to, that the people who have watched it up close describe in terms that are more concerned than celebratory. He has spoken in interviews about loneliness, not dramatically, not in a way designed to generate sympathy, but in the matter-of-fact way that a person speaks about a condition they have accommodated rather than resolved. The life that Ghost Adventures required of him was not a life that made the ordinary architecture of sustained human relationship easy to build or maintain. He was gone constantly. He was in extreme environments constantly. He was operating in a professional context that made specific and unusual demands on his psychological and physical resources constantly. And the person you become across years of that existence is a person who has been shaped by it in ways that the ordinary social world does not always know what to do with. That is the version of Zak Bagans that the show never had room for. The one that exists when the cameras are not running and the lockdown is over and the building is empty and the question is still there. The same way it was in the Michigan hallway in 2002, waiting for an answer that has not come yet. There is a version of Ghost Adventures that longtime viewers identified without being able to fully articulate what they were seeing. The show that existed in seasons 1 through 5 had a specific quality of genuine uncertainty, of a team that did not know what they were going to find and was visibly affected by what they found. The show that existed in seasons 15 through 20 had a different quality, more polished, more confident in its own mythology, more settled into the narrative frameworks that the audience had come to expect. And something in that settling was lost, not fabricated. The locations were still real. The evidence was still documented. The cast was still the same people, but the specific quality of not knowing, of being genuinely at the edge of understanding in real time, had been replaced by something more managed, more produced, more aware of what a Ghost Adventures episode was supposed to look and feel like. What that change reflected about Zak Bagans is the most complicated dimension of his story, because the shift was not cynical. It was not the result of a deliberate decision to trade authenticity for production value. It was the natural consequence of what years of sustained investigation produces in a person, a familiarity with the extreme that gradually changes the relationship to it. The locations that would have undone him in Season 2 were locations he could walk through in Season 18 with a professional composure that the early seasons did not have. That composure is not indifference. It is something harder to name. The accumulation of exposure that changes not what you believe, but how you experience what you believe. And it made the later seasons of Ghost Adventures something that the people who loved the early seasons recognized as the same show, while understanding, without being able to say exactly why, that it was not quite the same man making it. Zak Bagans is in his late 40s now. The Haunted Museum is open and operating and continues to be one of the more unusual cultural institutions in Las Vegas, which is not a city that lacks for unusual cultural institutions. He continues to investigate, to produce, to engage with the paranormal research community that Ghost Adventures helped build into the mainstream phenomenon it has become. He continues to acquire objects for the collection. He continues to put himself in proximity to the things he believes carry darkness, to the locations where documented suffering has left whatever it leaves, to the question that has organized his entire adult life around itself without providing the answer that would allow him to stop. That is the heartbreaking part, not the health, not the loneliness, not the relationships that the production years made impossible. Those are the costs, and they are real, and they matter. But the truly heartbreaking dimension of what happened to Zak Bagans is that after everything, after 26 seasons, after the Demon House, after the museum, after the decades of lockdowns in the darkest buildings on Earth, the question is still open. He has not found what he is looking for. He has found extraordinary things. He has documented experiences that the scientific community cannot explain and that millions of viewers cannot dismiss. He has built the most significant paranormal investigation franchise in television history out of a single unanswered question encountered in a Michigan hallway at 25 years old. And the question is still there, waiting, the same way it always was. That is what happened to Zak Bagans, and it is the most human story that Ghost Adventures ever contained, hidden in plain sight across every season, visible in every investigation, audible in every moment when the building goes quiet and he is standing alone in the dark and asking one more time if anyone is there. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe now and turn your notifications on. There is more coming. There is a dimension of Zak Bagans that his Ghost Adventures audience knows existed but has never fully engaged with. The creative ambitions that ran parallel to the investigation work, and that reveal a person whose relationship to his own public image was more complicated and more self-aware than the lockdown format of the show generally allowed to surface. He directed, he wrote, he produced projects that existed outside the Ghost Adventures framework and that reflected a genuine interest in storytelling as a craft, rather than simply as a vehicle for paranormal content delivery. The Demon House documentary was the most significant of these, and its reception, critical acknowledgement of its genuine unsettling quality sitting alongside skeptical readings of its factual claims, placed him in the specific uncomfortable position of a person whose creative work is taken more seriously than his investigative work by the institutions whose validation he was not primarily seeking. He did not make Demon House for critics. He made it because something happened in that building that he needed to document in a form that a standard Ghost Adventures episode could not contain. His book, Dark World, published in 2010 during the show's early peak, offered a version of his personal history and investigative philosophy that his audience received as confirmation of what they already believed about him and that the broader reading public largely did not encounter. He has worked on music. He has maintained creative interests that exist at a significant distance from the paranormal investigation brand that his name is commercially attached to. And those interests, the evidence of a person whose interior life is broader and more varied than the Ghost Adventures persona communicates, are the clearest available indication that the cost of building that persona across 2 decades is not simply the cost of the investigations themselves. It is the cost of becoming, in the public imagination, a single thing, when the person inside the persona has always been something more complicated and less easily categorized than that single thing allows. The gap between the public Zak Bagans and the private one is not a gap between performance and reality. The performance is part of the reality. The obsession is genuine. The investigation is genuine. The fear and the commitment and the specific quality of a person, organized entirely around a question they cannot stop asking, are all genuine, but they are not the whole of him. And the years of Ghost Adventures, by making them the entirety of his public identity, created a situation in which the rest of him, The creative ambitions, the private losses, the loneliness he has mentioned without dwelling on, the health that the work has affected in ways he has not fully disclosed, exists in a shadow cast by the very thing he built. That shadow is where the heartbreaking part lives, and it is where Zak Bagans has been living, alongside everything else, for a very long time.